The chandelier above the dining room table flickered, not from any fault in the wiring, but from the soft tremor of laughter that rippled around the room like clockwork. Every glass shimmered in rhythm, a staged clinking of comfort and pretense. My uncle's house, ornate as ever, smelled faintly of aged wine and polished wood. The walls were crowded with family portraits that hadn't been updated in years. At this table, time stood still, but hierarchy never did. Rhea sat directly across from me. Her lipstick matched her wine, burgundy, matte, deliberate. She wore the kind of dress that needed no necklace, a dark emerald silk piece that draped like wealth and knew it. Her wrist, lazily curled around the stem of a wine glass, flicked once, dismissively, before she spoke. "So," she said, drawing the word out as if clearing her throat with it, "still fiddling with that dashboard project? The one you built in your kitchen?" A few eyes turned toward me. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was curated, the kind of pause that invited laughter while pretending not to. She doesn't ask questions, she performs. I looked at her, and she smiled, not cruelly, not entirely. It was the smile of someone who believed their position was stable enough to patronize. There was no malice in her voice. That was the part that made it sting the most. "You know," she added, tilting her head, her earrings catching the light like small trophies, "if you ever want a proper title, I could pass your resume around. We're expanding our team next quarter." Someone chuckled. I didn't bother tracking who. My father shifted in his chair beside me, clearing his throat as if preparing to say something, but never did. My mother offered a faint smile and folded her napkin slowly, neatly, as though the careful creasing of cloth might smooth over what was said. I pressed my thumb against the edge of my water glass. It was cool, damp. I kept my gaze low, not out of submission, but calculation. If I looked up, it would feel like answering. And she didn't deserve answers. They always think silence means I've lost the words. But I never came to this table to speak. Rhea swirled her wine, watching it rise and fall against the glass as if it held her authority. She leaned back in her chair with ease, as though years of subtle dominance had earned her comfort here. And maybe it had. Across the table, my cousin Jeremy leaned in, chuckling. "Hey, don't knock the kitchen setup. That's how Amazon started, right?" The laughter that followed was generous, not supportive, performative. They weren't siding with me, they were neutralizing the moment. Rhea laughed too, but softly. She didn't need volume, she had presence. "Sure," she said, eyes back on me. "Everyone starts somewhere." Yes, somewhere. But you never stayed to see where I went. There had been a time, years ago, when her comments scraped deeper. When I used to walk home from dinners like these, feeling like I'd brought a pencil sketch to an oil painting gallery. I used to rehearse responses in the mirror, craft comebacks that could slice without bleeding. But those days were gone. Because now, I wasn't building sentences, I was building systems. Dinner carried on with the usual pageantry, talk of mortgages, schools, political half-jokes. My plate sat mostly untouched. Across the table, Rhea accepted another refill without asking. The server moved automatically, pouring the wine with practiced grace. She doesn't need to request power, it arrives before she finishes blinking. The fork in her hand never hesitated, not once. She didn't speak to me again after that, not directly. She had done what she came to do. A light bruise, disguised as humor, floated across a linen-draped battlefield dressed in good manners. And me? I folded my napkin slowly, pressing the crease the same way my mother had done moments earlier. I rose before dessert, excusing myself with a quiet nod. No one asked why. They never do. When you speak softly and succeed quietly, people stop waiting for your voice. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the ornate mirror near the coat rack. The tie I wore was plain, navy blue, unbranded, my shirt sleeves slightly wrinkled from the long drive. I looked forgettable, deliberately so. Because no one suspects the man who sits still. They forget the one who doesn't interrupt. And in forgetting, they leave him space to build. You mocked what I was still becoming. One day you'll walk into something I wrote. And you won't know until the walls answer to me. Behind me, the laughter rose again. I didn't turn, I didn't flinch. I stepped out into the cold air, wrapped my coat around me, and pulled the car keys from my pocket. The wind bit through the fabric. I welcomed it. Above, the windows of the dining room glowed gold. From here, the room looked like a painting, unchanging, warm, distant. And inside, she kept holding that wine glass like it still meant something. The sound of laughter still echoed behind me as I pulled out of the driveway. Faint silhouettes moved through the curtained windows like shadows in a stage play. I didn't look back a second time. The road ahead was wet with recent rain, the yellow dividing lines glistening under street lamps. Each passing tree blurred into the next, a stuttering film reel of suburban certainty. Inside the car, the silence pressed close. Not the peaceful kind. More, like the kind you earn through repetition, through swallowing everything. My phone vibrated once as I reached the first intersection. Ria's name lit up the screen. Ria Valen. Hey, if you're still trying to get that dashboard startup funded, I could pass your name along to one of our partners. Let me know. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. Instead, I pulled over beneath the overhang of a closed bakery and stared at the message for longer than I should have. There was no malice in the words, only the assumption that I needed rescuing. The kind of help dressed up as generosity. The kind of help that came with a leash. Still trying, she'd said. Still, as if she'd been keeping score. She hadn't been there when the seed round fell through, when the pitch deck I spent weeks refining was skimmed for 5 seconds and followed by a polite, "We'll let you know." She didn't see me staring at a blinking cursor in a half-finished code window at 3 a.m. She wasn't there the day I sold my camera, the one I used to photograph prototypes, because the rent took priority. The old apartment came back to me in colorless flashes. A single desk shoved between 2 cracked windows, the desk lamp flickering every time the microwave turned on. Extension cords tangled across the floor like exposed veins. My mattress lay flat on the wood panels. No bed frame, no couch. A stack of plastic containers served as drawers. The kitchen smelled like synthetic garlic from the discount ramen packs I'd boiled 3 nights in a row. I used the same pot to make tea. Sometimes I forgot to rinse it. And in that corner, blinking softly against the dark, my server tower, a Frankenstein machine I built from secondhand parts. Its hum was the only thing that kept me company most nights. I remembered finishing the first stable version of the UI. The code was clunky, inelegant, but functional. I remember staring at the deploy button for an entire minute. My hand hovered, dropped, hovered again. When I clicked it, the power surged slightly, and for a moment, I thought I'd blown the fuse. Everything went still. Then the light stabilized, the system went live. There was no applause, no confetti, just a status bar turning green. Progress is quiet, grief is loud, failure wants witnesses, success doesn't care who's watching. Weeks passed. I emailed proposals to 15 companies. 10 didn't reply. 4 rejected. 1, Sable Point Freight Services, an obscure mid-size logistics firm, asked for a demo. I remember scrubbing the calluses off my hands before the video call. I sat upright, wore a blazer over a t-shirt, and used a digital background to hide the mess behind me. I pitched like my life depended on it, because it did. When the call ended, they said they'd get back to me. I waited 3 days. They licensed the beta system for a 6-month trial. The first invoice they paid was $7,800.00. I transferred half into hosting costs and used the rest to renew the LLC filing I'd nearly let lapse. The email confirmation from the Secretary of State felt more meaningful than any award Ria had posted to LinkedIn. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. Not because I didn't want to share it, but because I had learned what validation sounds like when it's given too early. It turns into doubt disguised as advice. You sure this is sustainable? Have you thought about rejoining a firm for experience? You're talented, but you need structure. No, I didn't celebrate. I opened my codebase, rewrote the integration engine, and pushed a silent update. Then I archived Rhea's email offering help. Not deleted, archived. I kept it, not out of spite, but as a timestamp. She had reached out after the first pitch collapsed. She had seen a headline about my failed round, not knowing I'd already shifted to client direct service. She never asked what I was building. She assumed I was still in need. They never see the quiet pivot, only the splash when you fall. That same archived email would later share a folder with something much larger, the Sablepoint contract that became the seed fund for Amberline Systems. The name wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The logo was a simple amber line drawn through a gray circle. Most people didn't even realize it was meant to resemble a buried cable. What runs beneath things? That was the point. The work happened behind the scenes, invisible, essential. Rhea once told me at a family dinner, "Real companies have branding. You don't even have a logo." I hadn't responded. She laughed, sipped her wine, and someone clapped at the joke. Now, my logo processes her payroll. The car engine hummed softly under my hands as I pulled back onto the road. The message still sat unread on my phone, tucked into a folder called Keeps. I didn't block her. I didn't answer. She'd sent a lifeline I no longer needed, and never asked if I was drowning in the first place. Outside the window, the lights of the city softened into fog. Somewhere above them, in one of the high-rises she once called a building with real purpose, my servers were running, silent, flawless. And below all of it, deep in the layers of code and wire, a name she never bothered to learn was hard-coded into the backbone of every transaction. C. Reese, architect. The office lights clicked overhead with a sound I'd memorized. Soft, sterile, necessary. Inside the 14th floor conference room, I sat beside Amberline's general counsel while she reviewed the final asset transfer packet. On the screen, the deed reflected back at us in sharp serif font. Silvergate Commercial Holdings, now. Crossed out, replaced with Amberline Systems, LLC. I didn't sign with a flourish. There was no handshake photo, just a black pen, a date, and a signature in measured strokes. Ownership doesn't announce itself, it installs itself. Outside the glass, the city murmured. It was late enough that traffic had dulled to a mechanical hum, punctuated by flickers of taillights coasting across the boulevard. Somewhere near the South Plaza, an office tower glowed white from a rooftop party. Laughter, balloons, a live band fighting with wind. I minimized the deeds window. Another tab was already queued. Rhea Vallon, Departmental Summit Keynote, Ascend Partners. The thumbnail was an edited still. Rhea standing beneath gold uplighting, holding a wireless mic in one hand, her other tucked confidently into her blazer pocket. She wore tailored black pants and a silk ivory blouse that cinched at the waist, her posture straight, expression mid-smile. A bouquet sat on a podium behind her. Corporate branding flanked both sides of the stage. I clicked play. "Efficiency is more than reducing costs," she began, her voice trained, polished. "It's about knowing what to cut before it drags you down." Laughter, applause. I leaned back, my chair silent on the carpeted floor, and watched her move through her lines like choreography. Every inflection practiced, every nod rehearsed. She was animated, confident. She tossed a joke mid-speech about startups that prioritize passion over planning, and the audience chuckled, unaware it was probably me she was referencing. At least in part. Behind her, a slide transitioned to a pie chart titled Streamlining Redundancy. The irony couldn't have been more poetic. Her entire division would be marked non-core in the next 2 quarters. The acquisition she hadn't seen coming would render her metrics meaningless. I knew this because I already had the internal roadmap. Amberline's analytics division built the very algorithm that tagged her position for deprecation. She once called my office space depressingly local. Now it's hers, she just doesn't know it yet. Earlier that week, our operations team finalized the purchase of the building she worked in. It was a small acquisition, clean, silent. It came bundled with 3 floors of tenant companies and a modest tax credit for community redevelopment. Her firm's lease was part of the package. The same elevator she rode every day now opened inside property registered under my name. I didn't tell anyone in my company who she was. I didn't need to. My world ran on performance data, delivery pipelines, and silent server confirmations. She didn't appear on our metrics. No one was tracking her title, only her team's turnaround rate, and it wasn't good. I scrubbed forward in the video. Titles are earned, she was saying. Your job doesn't define you, but what you make of it does. Remember that. More applause. On the screen, she beamed, flashing the exact smile I'd seen at every family dinner since I was 17. The smile she used when she knew she'd won something, when she had the room, when I wasn't worth arguing with. The feed ended with a standing ovation. I closed the tab. Back in the office, the air felt sharp against my collarbone. I loosened my tie and stood, walking slowly toward the wide windows. Below, traffic blinked like coded signals in a language only machines understood. Everyone loves a title, but titles are like flags waved high until wind changes direction. Mine wasn't printed on glass or stitched onto lapels. It wasn't whispered in promotions or painted in press releases. It was embedded, deep, in code, in ownership structures, in system permissions, in the metadata of contracts my company now audited in her building. Earlier that month, my facilities lead had sent over a redesigned blueprint, modest infrastructure upgrades for tenants on the lower levels, wiring, ventilation, fiber routing. I approved it with a simple checkmark. One of the offices being rewired for future integration belonged to Ria's division. Not fired, not demoted, absorbed. Back at my desk, I opened a new tab and pulled up a file I hadn't touched in a while. /archive/messages/unraveling/. It contained all emails she'd ever sent me. Every forwarded link, every passive correction, every suggestion that I apply to more structured environments. The oldest one was dated 8 years back. Subject line, some friendly advice. Don't take this personally. The email had ended with, "You're talented, Callan, but the world's built on systems, not stubbornness." I highlighted the last line and copied it. Then I opened my notes app, pasted it beneath a timestamp, and added a tag, projection. The screen dimmed slightly as the lights outside flickered red. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass. A man in a loose shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar creased. No applause. No speech. No mic. Just the hum of a server tower beneath my desk and a building lease folded neatly under digital lock. Let them toast titles, I'll own the table. The clock ticked toward midnight. Somewhere in the city her office lights were still on. I imagined her at her desk, writing emails with purpose, unaware that the floor beneath her feet was already mine. Not through revenge, through acquisition. An acquisition doesn't need closure. The video of Ria's keynote was still paused on my screen, her polished grin frozen mid-applause when the news broke. Ascend partners to undergo acquisition after Q3 losses. Sources confirm strategic redundancies imminent. I stared at the headline, my eyes tracing the subtext more than the font. Strategic redundancies meant middle management was bleeding. Her title, the same one she wrapped around herself like silk, wouldn't survive a transition. The firm that once praised her for streamlining inefficiencies had quietly become the inefficiency. She didn't post about the news. She shared no statements, no outrage. 2 days later, she uploaded a filtered picture of black coffee beside a closed laptop and captioned it, "Sometimes closed doors are blessings. Reset, refocus, rise, new chapter, grateful heart." The hashtags read like armor. Reset, refocus, rise. Reverbs. None of them meant rebuild. That morning, HR forwarded me a hiring log for a new temp support staffer, Ria Vallon. She had applied to a vague listing on a job board, the kind we use to collect quiet minds. Analysts, archivists, people comfortable being unseen. The position was titled Integration Support, Process Documentation and Archival Flow. It didn't mention Amberline. She didn't ask. She must have thought it was transitional work, something to bridge the gap until her real life resumed. Her application came in at 3:42 AMA. She attached a clipped resume, strong, still confident. The cover letter was concise, professional, empty of doubt. She'd written, "I bring a decade of operational expertise to any team I join, with a proven record of streamlining high-pressure workflows." I approved the hire without annotation. Our systems auto-routed her assignment based on archival capacity and workstation availability. The system didn't know her, it knew only that she could type and follow structured protocols. Sublevel 2 had a vacancy, it filled it. RHIA. Her heels clicked down the corridor with practiced precision. Her dress was still tailored, her coat still cinched at the waist. She wore a muted gray shade today. Practical, serious, employable. The kind of color that didn't draw attention but demanded credibility. The HR assistant met her at the lobby, smiling, warm, perfectly uninvested. "Welcome aboard, Miss Valen," the girl said, handing her a badge. "You'll be in Integration Archive for your onboarding phase." Ria accepted it without blinking. She flipped it once in her hand, probably noting the lack of department branding. It read simply, Ria Valen, Support Staff Integration Archive. A temporary label, she likely thought, something to tide over until someone upstairs realized who she was. The elevator pinged softly as they approached. "You're assigned to sublevel 2, the assistant added casually, pressing the button marked B2. Elevator rides say things no resume can. The descent was smooth, slow, accompanied only by the mechanical whisper of motion. No music, no mirrored walls. Ria stared at her reflection in the brushed steel door. Her posture straightened. She still thinks this is an entry point. The doors opened into silence. Concrete floors, low ceilings, rows of sealed server racks and shelving units that hummed with quiet necessity. It didn't look like a demotion. It looked like a storage unit with fluorescent lighting. No one greeted her. "This is a high-trust, low-interaction zone," the assistant explained cheerfully. "Most communications done through the portal system. Check-ins are monthly." Ria nodded once, her lips drawn in a practiced half-smile, the smile of someone who had trained herself to adapt without revealing discomfort. She's still performing, even when no one's watching. She was led to a corner desk near the back, a folding table, one chair, a terminal that powered on with a quiet pulse. No windows, no departments, no glass to reflect anything but function. "The system will prompt your tasks," the assistant said. "Good luck." And then she was gone. Ria remained seated, staring at the login screen. The cursor blinked steadily as if tapping its fingers. Her badge sat beside her keyboard, untouched. She looked around once, slowly. Everything here was sealed, impersonal and absolute. "Callan." I watched her keycard activate from the top floor. The security system logged her presence without pause. Cameras noted her entrance, her timestamp, her workstation assignment. No alerts, nothing to flag. The system had no emotion. It simply processed entries. That morning, I passed her in the lobby. She didn't look up. Her focus was on her phone, lips pursed as she tapped out an email. She wore her ID clipped to her coat pocket, the same coat she once wore when giving lectures about strategic optics. She didn't know. I could have stopped. I could have said something, anything. Could have drawn a line from every past light to this moment and stitched it shut with words. Instead, I turned to facilities and said, "We'll need the sub-level wiring rerouted for long-term placement, signals weak down there." They nodded and took notes. She didn't even flinch. The stage she once stood on is 4 floors above her now, and she hasn't noticed the lights are off. The elevator doors sealed shut behind her with the soft press of vacuum-sealed silence, the kind that doesn't echo, doesn't linger, just vanishes into concrete air like a secret whispered into a well. Ria sat at the same folding table, her back upright, her coat draped neatly over the back of the metal chair. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, motionless, long after the screen had finished booting. A blinking cursor pulsed in the upper left corner of the display. One message waited in her task queue. /archive packet 14A. B-index verify document. Estimated time 3 HRs. No secondary signature required. No name, no sender, no good morning, Ria. Just an assignment and a countdown. She blinked. Once. Then again. The room hummed with a low, mechanical buzz from the server banks stacked across the far wall. Their fans spun endlessly, a white noise with no rhythm, no rise or fall, like a song written to erase itself as it played. Cold light poured down from fluorescent tubes in a low ceiling that hadn't been painted in years. One of them flickered every third second. The uneven pulse cast her shadow in stuttered frames along the floor, as if even her silhouette couldn't fully exist here. Her lips parted slightly. I was told this was temporary. She opened the archive, thousands of files stretched across the screen in nested folders. The interface was unfamiliar. Bare bones, modular, functioned first, no visual polish, no welcome screen. Her task was to tag and reformat legacy contracts, using a protocol she'd never been trained on, a PDF loaded with a hiss of old formatting code. Independent Distribution Compliance Agreement 7B3, Sablepoint, freight obsolete. She frowned. She knew that name. Somewhere in the mess of layoffs and transition documents from her old job, Sablepoint had been mentioned in passing, a client that didn't make it through the restructuring. She tried to remember why, but the memories scattered like dust in motion. Why would a tech firm be archiving logistics contracts? She reached for her thermos. Matte steel, her initials etched faintly near the base. Her nails tapped against it as she unscrewed the cap. The coffee inside had gone lukewarm. She swallowed it anyway. There was no coffee machine down here. No pantry, no coworkers, no chatter from across partitions, no smell of lunch reheated in communal microwaves. The only sounds were the steady hum of servers and the occasional mechanical hiccup from the fluorescent light above her head. She opened her internal portal and clicked Facilities Request. A drop-down appeared. She selected Desk Relocation Inquiry. Reason for request? She hesitated, then typed, basement conditions not suitable for long-term work. Prefer reassignment closer to daylight. She hovered over the submit button for a second longer than she meant to. Then she clicked. It disappeared into the system like a drop of ink into ocean water. 3 days passed, then a response. Request received, queue flagged for Q4 departmental reviews. This message was sent from an automated inbox. Replies will not be monitored. Rhea stared at the screen, jaw tightened, fingers slack over the keyboard. Queue flagged. The wording wasn't a no, it was worse. It was permission to wait without acknowledgement. She searched the employee directory, looking for a real name, someone she could speak to. Everyone listed for operations had vague initials. When she clicked Contact, it rerouted her back to the portal homepage. The isolation wasn't hostile, it was surgical. On the 5th day, she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed slowly, sealing her in mirrored steel. She adjusted her collar and fixed her hair in the reflection, applying soft lip color with the kind of practiced ease you only develop when image is currency. As the doors opened to the lobby, sunlight poured through the high glass atrium. She exhaled once, deeply, as if she'd surfaced from water. The reception area looked different in daylight. Brighter. Sharper. There were people here. Clean suits, expensive shoes, laughter in corners of the room that didn't echo. She crossed toward the cafe stand tucked near the far window. Her eyes scanned the room, expecting, without admitting it, to see someone familiar. Someone she'd impressed, someone she used to manage, anyone. Instead, a man in line turned slightly, glanced at her badge, then turned away again. She looked around. No one said her name, no one called out. She spotted a group of managers seated near the high counter, laughing over their tablets. One of them was reading a performance brief from her old firm, Ascend. She walked closer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle, professional. "Is that the new round of rollouts from the migration pipeline?" The man looked up, polite but distant. "Sorry, are you from acquisitions?" "No, She hesitated, suddenly aware of the weight of her badge clipped near her waist. "Support Staff Integration Archive?" "I'm in the sub-level team," she added. He smiled, almost apologetically. "Ah, got it, the compliance sorters. Thanks for the heavy lifting down there." She nodded once, of course. That was the end of the conversation. She didn't go to the cafe. She stepped back into the elevator alone. That night, she stared at her ceiling. Her apartment felt colder than usual, her expensive decor muted under the soft orange light of a single lamp. She pulled the badge from her purse and laid it on her bedside table. The text stared back at her like a sentence. A quiet, sealed verdict. It's not that they dislike me. They don't see me. She set her alarm for 6:00 a.m. And in the corner of her screen, the portal chimed again. /archive packet 15C. Estimated time 4 SAPs. No secondary signature required. The lobby lights hummed brighter that morning. It was subtle, like the difference between winter sunlight and spring. The kind of glow that didn't ask to be noticed but rearranged the room regardless. Rhea stood near the directory panel, holding her thermos with both hands. She wasn't late, but she had started arriving early, 10, sometimes 15 minutes ahead of her shift. It gave her time to breathe in a room that still acknowledged ceiling height, soft music, and glass. Up here, the air moved like it remembered comfort. She didn't speak to the receptionist. They never said much beyond the first week. A nod was enough. She wasn't waiting for anything in particular, just delaying the descent. Her thumb traced the rim of the thermos as the elevator let out its quiet chime behind her. Then, the air changed again. This time with intention. She didn't turn at first. It was the tone of the receptionist's voice that made her freeze mid-sip. It dropped a half octave, polite but sharpened by formality. "Good morning, Mr. Reese." The name fell like a dropped coin in a quiet cathedral. Yeah, turn slowly. She saw him walk through the glass entrance, flanked by two department heads she didn't recognize. They carried tablets and black folios, dressed in navy and graphite tones that matched the company's branding more than their personalities. At the center of the three, Callan moved with stillness. Not stiffness, stillness. The kind that doesn't seek space, but defines it. His suit was unpatterned, sleeves slightly creased from actual wear, not display. His hair was cut short, professionally indifferent, and yet there was something in the way the hallway lights refracted in his wake that made the carpet feel shorter, the walls narrower. Her breath caught without warning. Alan Reese. It didn't make sense at first. She knew the name, of course she knew it, just not like this. Not accompanied by suits, not greeted with Mr. by the front desk staff she passed daily, not walking with purpose that others followed. He didn't glance at her. Not fully. He looked past the reception desk, nodded faintly as if acknowledging something, someone, behind her. A fragment of recognition. Not greeting, not connection. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Not even a whisper. That can't be him. She took a step forward, unthinking. Her badge swung slightly from her hip. Her mouth tried to shape a word, something safe. Colin? But even that seemed fragile in this new air. He turned toward the receptionist's desk without slowing his stride. "Please let facilities know we'll need the sub-level wiring rerouted," he said calmly. "The signal's unstable, and they'll be down there a while." The words landed like bricks in her chest. "Sub-level? Down there. Third." He didn't smirk, didn't linger, didn't offer the cruelty of theatrical satisfaction. That would have been easier. Something to bite, to push against. Instead, he gave her nothing, only presence. As if her existence in his world had already been acknowledged, measured, processed, and archived. I like her badge, like her desk, like the packets she spent hours reviewing each night in that home-written basement. The directors murmured updates beside him as they crossed toward the elevators. Data points, logistics, procurement cycles, none of it addressed to her. None of it within her grasp. Rhea stood still. Her fingers clenched the thermos harder than necessary. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. Sharp, singular clarity that rolled like thunder behind the ribcage. How long? How long had he been here? Not in the building, but above her? She scanned back through vague hallway conversations, through emails she assumed were anonymous, through system delays she chalked up to poor infrastructure. How many of those decisions had his name in the metadata? She remembered her first day being handed the badge by an HR assistant with a too-practiced smile. No fanfare, No orientation beyond logistics, no coffee station, no colleagues. Only a chair beside rows of sealed machines and the hum of silence that answered everything. The elevator pinged again. Callan and his directors disappeared behind mirrored steel. She stared at the closed doors as if they would open again, offer her a rewind, a confrontation, a line of dialogue to cling to. None came. She turned back toward the reception desk. The woman behind it had already resumed typing. The morning playlist had shifted to soft piano. "Who was that?" Rhea asked, before she could stop herself. The receptionist looked up briefly, surprised by the question. "Mr. Reese. He owns the building." There was no awe in her tone, only confirmation. Rhea blinked. Once. Then nodded slowly, muttering a dry, mechanical thanks she didn't remember forming. She returned to the elevator without another word. This time, the descent felt different. Not colder. Heavier. Each floor she passed, 10, 9, 7, 4, felt like a memory revisited out of order. Each light that dimmed above her seemed to whisper a name she'd once spoken over cheap wine, half laughing at its obscurity. Amber Line Systems, what a plain name. And now it swallowed her. The elevator stopped at sublevel 2. She stepped out. The hum greeted her like an old secret. Her screen blinked, awaiting her return. /archive packet 16B. Verify, document, no secondary signature required. Above her, floors continued to breathe in natural light, surrounded by recognition and real coffee. She sat down, and for the first time since her reassignment, she didn't open the file. She stared at the screen, blinking slowly. Not in confusion, in comprehension. He built the walls. I decorate the basement. The screen still blinked. She hadn't moved in minutes. Rhea sat in the dark of sublevel 2 with the glow of her monitor painting a soft blue sheen on her cheeks. Her badge, still clipped neatly at her hip, reflected a warped version of her own face, rounded slightly from sleepless weeks, makeup minimal, hair pinned with quiet urgency. He didn't look at me, not directly. She told herself that 3 times. Each time it landed with a new kind of weight. Because he hadn't ignored her. He'd acknowledged her presence, the way you acknowledge a structural beam in a hallway. Noted, registered, unchanged. The cursor on her screen hovered above a folder titled Amber Line Systems Legacy Partnership Log. Her chest rose once, shallow. She opened her browser, typed without thinking, guided more by something in her ribs than in her head. Amber Line Systems, founder. The page loaded slowly. Wireless was always weaker in the basement. She tapped her fingers once, twice, against the tabletop as the image appeared. Professional. Clean. Black and white, a headshot of Callan Reese against a muted background. Minimal expression. Collar sharp. Eyes steady. Founder and Chief Systems Architect. Callan Reese. Amber Line Systems is an automation infrastructure firm specializing in post-scaling architecture, designed to function without applause. She leaned back. Her breath caught in the base of her throat. It's him. Her fingers slid off the trackpad. She stared at the screen without blinking. There was no paragraph about his mission, no self-congratulatory backstory, just a single line beneath the header. We don't broadcast, we build. She looked away as though the screen had scolded her. Her eyes caught the edge of her thermos. Cold now, unopened. Then they drifted to her desk drawer. She opened it slowly, reaching past the training manuals and data forms until her hand found the small plastic envelope she'd tucked there weeks ago. The photo hadn't faded. It wasn't old enough for that. A family shot. Christmas Eve, maybe 8 or 9 years back. Her arm was around Callan's shoulder, tight, proud. He had that soft, uncertain look in his eyes, the one people wore before the world had taken enough from them to teach restraint. She was laughing. He was smiling quietly, holding a half-eaten cookie. He remembered that day. She'd made a joke, something small, dismissive, harmless, about his project, about the fact that he hadn't been invited to pitch night at her firm. The room had chuckled. She hadn't meant it cruelly, she never did. "You're talented," she had said, "but you're not exactly marketable." At the time, he'd said nothing. Now he didn't have to. Her screen chimed, a new message appeared. Internal dispatch. Subject: Q2 Systems Recap Integration Archive. From Systems Admin, do.not.reply at amberline.internal. She click. There was no greeting, no signature. The message contained a plain quarterly breakdown of archived packet volume, verification rates, and data integrity percentages. At the bottom, in smaller font, was a simple line. Contributors: active, non-core. Balin, Ria, sublevel 2, integration archive. Her name. No title, no commendation, a label in a system that processed effort like static. She scrolled back up. No mention of her contributions. No direct address. Nothing that indicated anyone had seen her. They didn't demote me, they didn't ignore me, they processed me. She rose from her chair. The servers continued to hum, indifferent to the momentum crashing inside her chest. The fluorescent light above flickered again, once, twice, before settling into its usual dull stasis. She walked toward the far wall, the one with the fire evacuation map framed in glass. The layout of the building was printed in tiny grayscale, ground level through sublevel 2. Her finger hovered above the floor plan. She used to sit 4 stories above this diagram: glass conference rooms, espresso bar, rooftop briefings. The corner suite with a full-length window had been hers for 6 months. She used to complain that the glare interfered with her tablet screen. Now there wasn't a single window in sight. She sat back down, opened the photo again. Her younger self stared back, chin raised, eyes sharp, her hand confidently gripping the shoulder of a boy who hadn't yet built the cage she now worked in. It wasn't retaliation, it was architecture. Her inbox pinged once more. Reminder: packet 16B, verification pending. She exhaled, long and slow, then typed a line into the task window. Packet verified, no amendments, refiled. Her hands moved without hesitation. Her chest, however, remained hollow. She reached into her bag and pulled out her earbuds, plugged them into the terminal. No music, just a white noise loop, something to match the server hum and drown the war in her thoughts. She pressed play. Then she opened the next archive folder. /17C, Sable Point Dispute Metadata Reconciliation. The cursor blinked. The screen stared. And Ria began typing like her hands belonged to someone else. The house hadn't changed. Same polished floors, same chandeliers flickering over borrowed warmth, the same scent of roasted rosemary and vanilla candles mixed into a manufactured sense of home. These family gatherings always pretended at ease, like tension could be softened with wine and curated playlists, and maybe for most people, it could. I arrived late. Deliberately. By the time I stepped inside, half the plates were cleared, the cheese board was down to its final wedge, and conversations had softened into lower registers, the kind that carry familiarity but no risk. I didn't knock. My presence wasn't unexpected. It never had to be. I moved quietly across the hallway, nodding at an aunt who still called me kiddo, and a cousin who once borrowed my laptop and never gave it back. There was no need to announce anything. Presence, I've learned, announces itself in silence. From the far side of the room, near the mantel, I saw her. Ria. She was seated in one of the corner chairs, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap, a glass of untouched wine resting against her knee. Her hair was tied back in a low knot, sleek, clean, professional, but her shoulders were wrong. They didn't carry the same poise I remembered. They sat slightly forward, as if trained over time by something heavier than posture. She didn't look up. Not when I entered. Not when I passed within 8 feet of her. Her eyes remained fixed on a spot near the baseboard, as though reading secrets written in the grain of the hardwood. Her silence wasn't avoidance, it was awareness. And that made all the difference. I turned toward the dining room where the remainder of the family had gathered. Half-finished plates, stories being retold, someone playing old wedding videos on mute from their phone. I joined for a few minutes. smiled where appropriate, laughed when necessary. Eventually, someone tapped me on the arm. A cousin I barely remembered. Thin, overly eager, the kind who attends networking seminars and collects quotes like badges. "Hey," he said. "I've been meaning to ask, what exactly do you do again?" I turned to face him. His eyes were full of good intentions and complete oblivion. I tilted my head slightly and replied with a shrug. "Back-end systems," I said. "Nothing exciting." He nodded like he understood. He didn't. I didn't stay long. I never do. I made my quiet goodbyes, wrapped my coat over my arm, and moved toward the front hall. Outside, the evening had gone cold, the kind of cold that settled in layers, like slow, certain, final. The door creaked softly as I opened it, and the wind pressed faintly against my chest, reminding me the world kept moving no matter who stood still inside. As I stepped across the threshold, something made me glance back. One last scan, one last measure of the scene. And there she was, still seated, still silent. But now, her eyes were on me. It wasn't a look of apology, nor was it anger. It was something heavier, realization without resistance, a stillness she hadn't worn before. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. There was nothing to say. She hadn't been punished. She hadn't been stripped of power in some public spectacle. She had been absorbed, quietly, into something she used to laugh at. Not erased. Her glass was still half full. He didn't drink from it. I didn't nod, didn't wave. I held her gaze for one moment, long enough for the weight to settle, but not long enough to lift it. And then I turned. The air outside tasted sharper than I remembered. I walked to the car parked under a street lamp, still flickering with uncertain voltage. I sat behind the wheel and let the engine idle. I didn't check my phone. I didn't replay her expression. I closed my eyes once and exhaled. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't retribution. It was completion. She had spent years standing on stages built for her. Stages of confidence, status, curated elegance. I was never meant to share those stages. I was a footnote, a hobbyist, a joke told over holiday wine. Now the stage was 4 floors above her, quiet, sealed, untouched by spotlights or applause. And she wouldn't walk it again. Because the stage wasn't a place. It was a system. And I had designed it. If you've ever been told you were too quiet, too slow, or not enough, remember, some of the strongest foundations are poured in silence. This isn't about revenge. It's about building something so undeniable, even those who mocked you have to walk your hallways. Share your story below. When was the moment you realized you didn't need to be louder, just more unshakable? Subscribe if you believe in patient power, quiet victories, and justice that doesn't need applause.